Welcome to Hope Springs Eternal, our 18th episode, but our first of 2025. I'm Pastor Jay Jackson with...
I'm Ricky Ricks.
I'm Katie Lammert.
All pastors here at First United Methodist Church at Longview, Texas. And today we are talking about a nice light subject, atonement. The atonement understanding of our faith that has many dimensions and a great span of differentiation in not only how we understand atonement, but how we relate to God through it. So, Ricky, how do you feel about atonement?
I feel about atonement. I think about when Jürgen Moltmann wrote The Crucified God, and he starts it off with this question about how can we say we love an old rugged cross? And I think about atonement, and I think about what it is to think about this, the passion and death of Christ, and wonder how can we give word to it? How can we look upon it? And yet somehow it changes our lives. It changes our lives. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And and I really hope we don't end up at the same place, because I think it will be a cool thing to hear different perspectives on the cross and what it means to us and how it changes our lives.
Katie, when you learned we were going to talk about atonement today, where did your mind go to?
I mean, I think atonement is a very heavy subject. I think it would be helpful, and I know you will, but to talk about what it is that we mean when we use the word atonement. But honestly, I go to that, older book that they made into a movie, and it's just so depressing. And it's kind of like what you said, that the phrase atonement, the word atonement, does have this really hard and heavy meaning for each of us, that it is hard to look upon the crucified Savior, the old rugged cross. There's a heaviness to the thought of atoning for our sins. There's a heaviness to the thought of Jesus atoning for us, and yet there's a beauty in it, because atonement, like the title implies, is how we become one with God, the making of a way where there was no way for us to be at one with God. But so I honestly think of that, just that horrible, really old movie. I think Keira Knightley's in it, and I mean, it's just like everybody dies at the end, and so it's like that's the heaviness.
I hope
of
everybody
it.
has seen the movie Atonement. So
well,
that
it's like 20 years old,
I know,
so
but,
it's their fault if they haven't.
Every time
seen
I make
it
a movie reference and say something, I say, "Thanks, Jay. I was going to watch that next week." Sure, you were.
Well, but it's like that's the thought. But in the movie, it's like the way you atone is like, everybody dies. That's how you atone for it. It's like that's what you deserve is death, and it's just so heavy. It's like
it is.
Don't watch the movie. It's good, but it's horrible.
I think I really appreciate, Ricky and Katie, that you started off with the heaviness of atonement. And we can't talk about atonement, especially in the Christian sense of the atonement of God through Jesus Christ's death upon the cross, as anything light and airy. And yet the purpose of atonement, the sense of an act of God that breaks down barriers that we cannot break down for ourselves, that restores relationship that we cannot restore on our own, to find intimacy in our relationship with God through the action of God in a selfless, sacrificial manner, is at the heart of the best of who we believe ourselves to understand our own identity as followers of God and Jesus Christ. I mean, this is at the heart what brings us close to God. Mm-hmm. And it is at a difficult price. in whatever way we understand atonement. That the sense of God coming in the flesh and having to experience death, horrific death on a cross, has power in it for us for the best of purposes for God. To really, the one who created us and who has full intention of relationship with us through our faith, that God would go to the extreme of experiencing that on our behalf so that we can have that weight taken off of us, that we can have that barrier removed between us, I think is powerful and redeeming. But it comes through a cost, a very heavy one, that many of us would like to have an easy get out of jail free card rather than this act of God that we profess has power. So at one moment, I mean, Katie said she wanted to hear what I had to say, and then she stole the line from me. To be at one with God is the very purpose of God's creative power in having humanity in the image of God brought into relationship with God. He created us for relationship. Anyone who could do what God has done can do this himself. God's self can do this. But to give us the opportunity to choose relationship with God, to be truly cooperatively in connection with God, is an amazing gift, but one that we've failed over and over in and need a way to recover from that failure, to rise out of the muckiness of our own death through sin. And it takes something pretty dramatic, I believe, to allow us to find that redemption. Ricky, there's a lot of connections to the early Judaic practices of sacrificial sacrifice for atonement. You want to share your thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, I think right from the start, when they talk about making things right in the Levitical laws and the temple practices, in the whole of the life of Israel, there is this sense that things have to be put right. And so some of that had ritual to it with the temple, and this is how you shall do this. You shall bring your sin offering. You shall bring this offering, and to atone for whatever. And then practices like sanctuary cities and things like that, where if this happens, then this is how you will act towards these people. This is a simplistic thing, but it's like a pie, and a piece has been wrongfully taken out of the pie, and how is it made whole? And so, both in life practice and in the ritual of their lives, there was this commitment that things would be made right. In your relationship with God, your relationship with each other.
Yeah. And in this sort of sense of obedience to the law, in having these rules, these commandments that were passed down to us, the continual failure of humankind to find obedience on their own. The weight of sin is not just the sin, but the shame and guilt that's associated with us that seems to become the obstacle to restoration. And, the thought of being able to, all right, we don't believe in, human sacrifice, but to then use something of value to the individual, to the family, as a means of using the power of blood as a symbol of life, as a significant linkage to life and death, to give up something of value, to feel like now that has allowed me to have that weight removed, this ritual action that then infers, imputes upon us a restoration that is ours. It's our problem, but we need an avenue to do that. And in the early days, it was giving up something of importance, a calf, a goat, a pigeon, whatever it may be, to represent the acknowledgement and sacrificial ability to then find restoration through that. Even though that was moved towards more of a word Torah-focused faith, that language continued on and has been, utilized in Christianity to understand what Jesus has done upon the cross. And I think those connections, this idea of that which we cannot do for ourselves, God has done for us through Jesus, has had pretty substantial impact on the way in which we understand the nature of God and the nature of how we can find restoration, if not on our own, through what God has done. What does that say to you, Katie?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it says a lot. I don't know about all the ins and outs of the Old Testament sacrificial system, but the way I've always read it, that has been just a place of grace for me, is noticing that God always makes a way back to God's self. Mm-hmm. And I've always just appreciated that, and that there is gravity to it, and there is seriousness to it, and there is sacrifice to it, but there's always a way. And that where there previously was no way, that there is a way. And now through Jesus, that's the ultimate way that we can never diminish, that it's not about our obedience, even though we should try to live as obediently and righteously and faithfully as we can. But, that Jesus made a way to be with God forever. And so I just think that as heavy as it is, that's what I kind of come back to a lot of times when I read some of this really weighty sacrificial stuff and the bloodiness of all of that stuff. I just think, there's this way. God was making a way to God's self all throughout the Old Testament, and then in Jesus in so many ways that I honestly don't know. I mean, there's a lot about the atonement of Jesus that I feel like I don't quite have my finger on yet, or my mind on fully comprehending. But my thoughts are that God made a way. Yeah. That
I just know for myself, dealing with two sides of my ministry, end of life conversations with people who are trying to find a way to feel like they're right with God. Or the unworthiness that seems to be rampant that prevents people from a pathway of worship, of engagement in the Christian faith. That there always seems to be this sense of, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Either saying, I don't belong there, I'm not worthy for that. Well, none of us are, okay? Join the crowd, right? Or this sense of, what can I do before I die to make things right? And our faith has been centered on God has made it right.
Yeah.
I go back to that story of that Bible school and that Baptist church that I attended when I was kind of had a little thing for the Baptist preacher's daughter. When were you saved? And they were all giving dates of their lives. I was saved when Jesus died on the cross and rose again. Yeah. That act of God has saved my life, that gracious act. And I have to be able to be in a position that I can receive that, respond to that, and live into that reality of what God has done. And because I can't do that on my own. I can't be good enough. I can't be smart enough. I can't give enough. And I'll have people ask me, how much should I give to the church? How much should I give to charity? How much should I be involved in mission work and everything? I think the answer is, what does God call you to? But that's not a way of paying your way into this. We're not selling indulgences. We're not, having offerings to, pay off one's sin. God has done something gracious in this horrific event of Jesus' crucifixion that has done something for us. It's paved a way. It's opened the door. It's broken down a barrier. It's restored relationship. However you want to look at that. How do you respond to that, Ricky?
I have lots of questions about atonement. I do think it is transformative, like nothing else. I think it is. It opens doors to us like we can't even begin to imagine. And yet I guess I'm like Katie. I have lots of questions about it. I don't grasp it, don't understand it. I ask questions like, is this something God had to do? Or is this something that God freely chose to give? Mm-hmm. The whole blood thing, when people say, yeah, but did he have to kill Jesus, or did Jesus have to die? And the whole blood thing, there's a part of me that goes, well, God is God. God could have done this anyway. And so those are things that raise questions. And so if I am honest about atonement as kind of a theological discussion, I get lost sometimes. But I do believe that it is transformative. And you are right to talk about it in a pastoral sense, to talk about how this gives us hope and gives us promise.
And has power.
And has power, has great power to it. Because even as I don't want to talk about it or don't want to think about the gravity of it, still, there's like no service in my Christian year that is more powerful to me than Good Friday. Nothing more powerful to me than that.
Which many people will avoid at all costs.
Sure.
And yet Easter morning has no significance if one does not understand Good Friday.
And, and part of it I understand why you wouldn't want to come to Good Friday. I understand that. I get that.
Yeah.
But you're right. The power that the cross opens to us is just incredible.
Yeah.
And I think it's like that those questions that people might bring up, especially at, nearing death or just in places of shame and guilt and baggage of things that they've done, of wanting to do something and wanting assurance of their rightness and oneness with God. They're at oneness with God. Richard Rohr, who we've talked about on the podcast several times, but when he talks about atonement, one of the things he talks most about is the powerlessness of humanity. And he's so blunt about it, and it's so hard. But one of the things he says is we as humans are totally powerless, and our egos fight it. And we'd prefer a transactional atonement with God. We'd rather God say, for you to be right with me, for you to be at one with me, do steps A, B, and C, and
Quid
do
pro
this.
quo.
Yeah, do this, that. Yeah, and Rohr talks about that. This sorry, I can't say that. Like
Quid
this
pro quo.
yeah,
Yes, I'll say
way of atonement, and I resonate with that because I think so many of us, all of us, are just our human nature and our egos and our pride. We want to be able to say, I have given this, and so you give this, and now it's a transactional, it's a deal, and we're almost even, and we're going to say that we're under God, but we feel a little bit better, but Rohr is just like, no, in the atonement of God, no matter what our views are about it, no matter where our theology falls on the needfulness or the why or the, whatever about the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, no matter where we are on our faces in humility and in powerlessness because we can't do anything and he does everything in that instance. Jesus takes on everything. And I just think that's we hate being in that defenseless place of receiving mercy and forgiveness and grace. And it's so overwhelming. And even though it's beautiful and we want it, we want the forgiveness, we need it, we're desperate for the forgiveness. It's so humiliating and so humbling and we're just so prostrate before God. And we just, I think we forget because so much of our life is spent standing, so much of our life is spent with us exalting ourselves and making a way and working hard and figuring it out and doing things that are good and right and true. And we forget that before God, we fall on our faces and that in his love, Jesus, in whatever way atoned for us in our sinfulness. And I think I remember a time that, I think Lily, one of my daughters, was upset about something she did, and she just asked, do you still love me? And it was this tearful thing, and I was like, yes. And then she said, I don't know, some dramatic thing. I don't love me anymore. And I was just like, well, that's just not up to you. You can't control, actually, whether I love you or not. And I just think about that, but times infinity, that God, I think so much of us is saying, no, God, don't love me anymore. And God's going, that's just not up to you. That's up to me.
Well, I think that sense of human powerlessness that Rohr talks about there has many layers to it, okay? Because there are times where we use that as a escape. I'm powerless to this, so I'm just going to give in to sin. I'm going to allow myself to, or I can't deal with that, so I'm going to live in denial. When I was dealing with my class on atonement for a Christian believer a couple of weeks back, I shared with people what are the alternatives to atonement. If God has not done something to restore relationship with us through Jesus Christ, what are the alternatives to that? Well, one of the alternatives is that somehow we earn it back,
right.
That we're doing something that's there. And so many times populist Christianity comes into, if you are in church a certain amount, if you give enough of an offering, if you're engaged in these types of things, that somehow you will earn your way into relationship with God, which is not the Christian faith in its faithful practice. But the unhealthy alternatives are to live in a life of denial. I'm not sinful. I'm good by nature. I don't need anything from God. I'm just fine on my own. Another is to do anything to escape from it, which leads to addiction and focus into other aspects of our lives so as to escape the reality of our brokenness and of our need for God's gracious power. And the other one is to blame. I'm going to point it to somebody else. I'm not bad for this reason. I'm bad because my parents didn't raise me right, or this person didn't give me the opportunity, or this person harmed me. And when it comes down to it, those are all unhealthy alternatives to an understanding of the power of God that is restoring relationship with us, not in a fatalistic kind of way of that we're terrible, we're bad, and all this type of stuff, but that we have something, a spark from God that can be restored into relationship with God through this amazing sacrificial nature of God that we understand in the atonement, in whatever way we do it. I also think, I know I'm rambling here, but I'm going to go into this, that some of the things that have caused us to have struggles with atonement are in the variety of ways in which people characterize atonement. That different aspects of the faith have talked about atonement in such ways that make it more difficult for people to receive. I'll use an example. The idea of ransom. Jesus was ransomed to Satan so as to buy our atonement, to make us one with God by appeasing a sense of one who represents evil. I don't think God has to bargain with anyone in that kind of way. But for some people to see that somehow as a victory over Satan helps them receive atonement in that way. That hinders me in that way. There are some who will just talk about Jesus as representing the absolute way in which God is sacrificial and selfless, and so we should be that way, so it's more of just a moral example. I don't think it's just that. I don't think it's just a sacred rite. We talk about blood every communion Sunday, about this represents the body and blood of Christ, bread and juice, and we talk about blood all the time. I hate blood. I'm not a doctor because I didn't want to be around bloody people all the time. But I think that there's something in what God has done sacrificially in Jesus Christ that has done what I can't do for myself, or that nobody else can do for me. And if we can see it in that positive light of the selflessness and sacrificial nature of God, then maybe it's a little easier for us to let go of that burden that we heap upon ourselves, that is the guilt and shame associated with our sin. Ricky, I know you want to jump in.
I don't know.
Correct me in some sort of way.
No. But I have been thinking about the word restoration, and lots of times when we use that word, we think about going back. And I really think that when I read through the Old Testament, there's this kind of, here is the people and their lives, and then they fall into a pit. And the way I think about it is that God doesn't just raise them back up to the same place, but takes them to a new place.
Moves them forward.
And moves them forward. And that it is a better place than where they were. And I think about atonement like that whatever it is and however it happens, it is to a new relationship, a deeper relationship with God. And I don't know, over the holidays, I thought a lot about the word glory. And that, we think about the angel's glory and all of that and everything, but I thought about the place where God leads us is to share in God's glory. That part of the atonement for me is that we move through this, and we are moved through this, and somehow, I was just thinking about like Charles Wesley's hymns, "Love Divine," "All Love's Excelling," and there's this great line in there, and it says, I think this is what atonement is. Finished then thy new creation, pure and spotless let us be. Let us see thy great salvation, perfectly restored in thee. Changed from glory into glory, till in heaven we take our place, till we cast our crowns before thee. And I love this part. Lost in wonder, love and praise.
Yep.
And however atonement happens, I think it is that doorway into that glory. What was it, C.S. Lewis's book, Till We All Have Faces? I mean, just an incredible book about, or when Paul says that, now we see through a mirror dimly, then we shall see face to face. And I think that that's the ultimate passion of the atonement for me.
Yeah. I was drawn to Romans 5. For while we were still weak, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. You know, that it's not about what we have aspired to achieve, but it's what God has done that does restore and move us forward in this way.
Yeah.
You know, in these many different theories of atonement, and there are numerous theories, too long for us to go through. I mean, I wrote down some of them: redemption, expiation, substitution, reconciliation, escape from wrath, ransom, moral example, conquest over evil. And we could go on through limitless things. In this deep, important aspect of how is God working with us for relationship? How are we? Where is God working? What are we to do? You know, this is the question at the heart of it. If we believe in God, we want relationship with God, and oftentimes we want it on our terms. But what is it that God's doing, and what is God expecting of me in this kind of way? In the ways in which people have tried to use practical examples of human understanding to speak to this, to signify some sense of what God has done in Jesus on the cross, they're all very incomplete in of themselves, but they're efforts to try to help us receive what God has done and to give some sort of picture, some sort of understanding to that, so that we can embrace and be embraced by what God has done in Jesus Christ. And I think we're still struggling for that. I've never seen, as brilliant as Richard Rohr is, or any of your favorite theologians and philosophers of our day, there are people who are still constantly speaking to this God-human relationship through Jesus Christ. And I think that we're all still trying to get at what we may not ever fully understand of our mind, to at least allow our hearts to be embraced in that and our lives to be directed by what God has done in Jesus Christ. And it is very bloody and gory and difficult, and it also is beautiful and restoring and glorifying in its nature. And that hymn speaks to that beauty of that sometimes we get caught up in the blood hymns to be thought of washed in the blood. There was such a difference of a different generation of how that was something to be desired that I think is hard for people in today's world to, especially when we see such heinous violence and loss like the circumstance in New Orleans on New Year's Day, when we see war in the Ukraine and in other parts of the world. It's hard for us to see power and restoration and beauty in blood. So it's something that I hope our conversation helps people think about and maybe find in some way a little bit better way of allowing God to be received and relationship to be renewed in this, that uplifts and makes better. Katie, something you'd like to say to put a bow on our conversation today?
No, I do think it's worth asking, for all of our viewers just to ponder, the atonement of God, and not just to let it be a Good Friday, or, just a kind of superficial, well, Jesus was sacrificed, or the blood of Jesus this, and let it be something that you actually do think about, because I think even if you don't come up with answers, which I think all of us here have shared, we don't know. We're not going to tell you. There's 1,000 different theories, and people much smarter than us don't know. And so we're not going to try to say that we know. But I think there is something really rich, and at least to me, that's been really beautiful and humbling about just thinking about it. And it has been challenging. There's times that certain songs like that, like one of my favorite songs, for instance, is There's a Fountain Full of Blood. And I even, to one of my theology teachers, I remember one time saying, well, you're completely ruining that song for me, But honestly, it just makes you think. And I think the more we think about it, and being okay not having the full answer, but the more we dwell on just what Jesus did, even not knowing the exact moment that atonement happened, and not knowing the exact how that atonement happened, I think it allows our at oneness with God, our relationship with God, just to become a much richer thing for all of our spirituality, so that when we do sing those songs, one of my favorite songs right now is Thank You, Jesus, for the Blood. I think I can say that wholeheartedly, even not quite understanding what it is that it signifies. And so I just think people should explore it and read some of these people that we've quoted, or some of these different theories that, because they all add just kind of layers that are...
Take a class like Christian Believer,
Yes, absolutely.
and go a little bit and see snippets from these theologians and readings from the scriptures that help to illumine not only the language of atonement, the historical perspective of it within Judaism, but how it connects with this understanding of a gracious, loving God who goes to such extremes as to shed blood on a cross to show the selflessness of God's nature. I do think we've got to have a warning with this as we're getting to a close. There are so many people who want to live in denial of a need for something that we can't do for ourselves, or to deny the responsiveness of how we are moved forward by not only receiving that, but by moving forward in the way in which we embrace that same kind of nature in ourselves. I think it's easy to blame other people and to blame other institutions to just find escape from it all. None of those are healthy and productive. So to have a relationship, you not only need to understand yourself and the other party in it, but there needs to be trust in that. And ultimately that trust in God has come through the Christian faith, through the extent that God would go to have that relationship with us. And God desires at one with us. Do we? Maybe that's where we can leave it today. I hope that you've gained something from our exploration of atonement. We have some exciting, fun things to talk about ahead. Jesus is Lord. We love a Savior, but are we willing to be obedient to a Lord? And how we explore our faith are going to be things that we're going to be talking about in the weeks ahead. I hope that you'll engage with us in this conversation. Please catch us when you can. Send us messages, questions. We've really enjoyed some of the banter that's come through these podcasts, and we are very much interested in hearing what you're gaining from this, what you have continued confusion over. You may be the one who can help us to better talk to how we as United Methodist Christians understand these important concepts and beliefs of our faith. Until the next time, may hope spring eternal.